In Illustrator, we now know that you actually draw these objects made up of paths and anchor points, and then you apply appearances to make it look the way that you want it to. But as you draw new objects, they are always applied in your document in a certain way. As you draw new art, each piece of art gets added on top of the previous piece of art. This is something which we call an object stacking order. Objects, by default, always get drawn on top of previously drawn objects. Now, it doesn't obliterate the object beneath it. In other words, it's as if they're kind of on two separate layers. I can still continue to move one of the objects on top without disturbing or destroying the object beneath it, but each time I create a new piece of art, that art gets added towards the top of the stacking order. For example, if I would draw now a third flower, that flower would be drawn on top of the second one. Now, when I'm using Illustrator, I do have the ability to make adjustments to the stacking order, meaning I could take the topmost flower right now and send it one step backwards inside of the stacking order, so right now it appears sandwiched between the other two flowers. Likewise, I could take that same flower and send it all the way towards the bottom of the stacking order, so it now appears beneath the other two objects. At any time, I can always select that object and bring it all the way back to the front again. But at any time inside of Illustrator, I'm always thinking about this stacking order, and I'm moving objects around inside of this stacking order. You might think of these as having three separate layers, but everything that's happening right now is really happening on one layer. You see, Illustrator has something called an object stacking order. That means that each object has its own place in the stacking order. That's all within a single layer. At any time, I can create a new layer, and that layer also has its own stacking order. If I take even a step backwards, all of my layers themselves also have a stacking order. So in theory, I can have one layer that has three flowers on it, and each of those three flowers enjoy their own stacking order, and then a second layer on top of this, which may have even more flowers, and those flowers have their own stacking order. But because those flowers are now inside of their own layer, that entire layer sits on top of the previous layer in the stacking order for layers as well. So it's an important concept to understand, the fact that we have this stacking order that applies across all the objects and layers inside of Illustrator. As we start to learn more about organizing and building our documents, we'll get a much better idea of how this works. But for now, it's important to understand this concept, that you can have things at the top of the stacking order, and that at any time, you can adjust an object's position within that stacking order as well.